was broken, mine was mended. He became sin, now I am clean. The cross he carried bore my burden. The nails that held him set me free. His life for mine, his life for mine. How could it ever be that he would die, God's Son would die to save a wretch like me? What love divine, he gave his life for mine. His scars of suffering brought me healing. He spilled his blood to fill my soul. His crown of thorns made me royalty. His sorrow gave me joy untold. His life for mine, his life for mine. How could it ever be that he would die, God's Son would die to save a wretch like me? What love divine, he gave his life for mine. He was despised and rejected, stripped of his garments and oppressed. I am loved and accepted, and I wear a robe of righteousness. His life for mine, his life for mine. How could it ever be that he would die, God's Son would die to save a wretch like me? What love divine, he gave his life for
Boy, that song is really the theme of the last several weeks here that we've been looking at John chapter 7, 8, 9 now. We're in chapter 9, so if you want to take your Bible and turn to John chapter 9, but we are still really focused on this light, this darkness aspect, and we're just in that and learning about that and reading about that. Do you remember, you probably played this game when you were young? I mean, if you're, I guess today's generation, you've never played this probably. It's probably Greek to you. You don't understand it. But those of you that are older, you know, you played the game called Blind Man's Bluff, where you would, it's an accelerated game of tag. You would take a person, you would put a blindfold over them, you would spin them around a few times to get them confused, to get them disassociated with the surroundings that they were there, and they would just go around trying to tag somebody. Blind man's bluff. I don't know, maybe you made a sound or you hollered something out. Same thing with Marco Polo or something like that. You've got a guy in a pool, and he's saying Marco, and you respond with, "Oh my goodness." Yeah, really, you got to be careful what you say, I guess. But anyway, so you get the idea, and you're trying in that pool there, you're trying to jump out and tag somebody, grab them. Same thing with blind man's bluff. You're trying to reach out, trying to grab, and all the while the rest of the people are spreading out, they're scattering. Well, that is a game, and maybe it was something like that in John chapter 9, but it wasn't a game for this guy that we meet here. Every day he's at the temple. He is reaching out. He is blind. It's not because of a blindfold, but he is physically born into blindness, and he is reaching out, groping, grabbing for somebody to touch. He's just not looking for a handout, even though he does need that. He is in desperate need of people to sustain him on a daily basis, but he is reaching and looking, trying to have some kind of human interaction with the passerbys, with the people that are there. He is feeling around. He is that person who is with outstretched arms looking for interaction. He's feeling around, but people are avoiding him. They are moving past him, moving around him. They are dodging him. So he's been here at the temple gates. He's been outside these walls here for no telling how long. He is looking for that interaction. He's needing help. He's needing somebody, wanting somebody to have something to do with him. And all of society, for the most part, is avoiding him. But this day is different. Jesus is there. He's going to do something that hasn't and wasn't done before with this guy. Jesus himself is going to grab the guy. He's going to grab the guy. And I'm sure it's just going to shake this guy. This guy's, who is this person? Who is this person? I have been reaching out for somebody, and somebody has now walked up to me and has taken hold of me and is doing something with me. He's got to feel dirty. He's got to feel unwanted. He's got to feel abandoned. He's got to feel lost. He hasn't seen anything. He's been born into darkness, and yet somebody approaches him and grabs him this time. He's got to wonder what is going on here. What Jesus does is not a bluff. Games we play might be to fool somebody, but Jesus is not fooling around with this guy. He is going to deliver this guy from darkness and bring him into an eternal light. Jesus had been in Jerusalem during this period. It's during this festival, this week festival here, the Festival of Tabernacles, the Festival of Booths that we have talked about. We understand what that was now. If you remember, even, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the light burning out in the temple, about the religious leaders, how they were in spiritual darkness. The light had burned out. That menorah had burned out. They are in spiritual darkness. Jesus has said He is the light. He's called Himself that. I am the light. So the spiritual leaders were in darkness. Now we come to an individual who is born in darkness. So it's still dealing with this issue of light. The spiritual leaders, spiritual darkness. The religious leaders, spiritual darkness. This guy, he is born into a life of darkness. So Jesus has just told the religious leaders, I'm God. He's claimed that. That claim has been over him. And they're furious about this. They don't want to hear this. They don't want to hear Jesus calling himself, I am. Jesus, he's just talked about Abraham saw him. How could Abraham see? You're not even 50 years old. You're not old enough. How could this have been? And he says, Abraham rejoiced when he saw me. That was last week. And Abraham's rejoicing was when the sacrifice was found up there for Isaac. When that sacrifice was found, the ram was caught in those thickets. And that was all last week. So Jesus is making these claims about himself. They are furious. And if you remember, John, chapter 8 starts out with the adulterous woman. And what are they wanting to do with her? They're wanting to stone her. And I told you, when you get to the end of chapter 8, by the end of chapter 8, they've still got stones in their hand. And who are they throwing those stones at now? They're coming for Jesus. And that's what verse 59 says. Therefore they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So they wanted to kill this lady. They wanted to trick Jesus. They wanted to trip him up. They wanted to show that he wasn't who he says he was, that he was either going to side one way or the other. He was going to cause some kind of rebellion. Jesus outsmarts them, speaks truth to them. So and then this adulterous woman, they're going to stone her, and then now they want to stone him. And that brings us to him walking up to this blind man, him leaving, going outside of the temple. And when you read verse 59, them wanting to pick up stones to throw them, the way it is written, some of them have already picked up the stones and have begun to throw them at Jesus. The tense and the way that it's written in the Greek there. So Jesus hides himself. Maybe they are already throwing stones at him. Jesus hides himself and he walks out of the temple. Verse 1. As he passed by. So that's what's happening. We've seen Jesus come to the temple. We've seen him have these celebrations. We've seen all of this set up, this background, this setting up of taking place today. So he's leaving the temple now. As he passes by, he saw a man blind from birth. So Jesus passes by the gate and he sees this guy. Jesus hid himself. He's passing by the gate. This guy is blind. This guy has no ability to see anything. He's not just legally blind for government purposes, just for disability purposes. He's not just legally blind for not able to drive a vehicle or sit on a donkey and navigate the streets of Jerusalem. This guy cannot see anything. And this is actually the sixth sign that Jesus does. It's called a semeion. This sign, and we've seen other signs too, but this sign points beyond itself. It is a sign that means something beyond what you are seeing there. So this semeion, this sixth sign right here, is to show that Israel is in spiritual darkness. We'll look at the other five some other time, but this sign is pointing to the fact that Israel is in spiritual darkness. So verse 1 says, Jesus passes by. He saw a man blind from birth. Now that blind from birth means from the genesis of his life, from the very beginning. This man, from the beginning of conception, his DNA was already programmed that he was going to be blind, that he was not going to see. Verse 2, and his disciples asked him, Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? So the disciples seem to have an idea who this guy is. Maybe the guy's been around there before. So they said, we've heard stories about this guy. They've heard of him. So they say, well, Jesus, who sinned? This guy, his parents, which one of them? What was the cause for this guy to be born blind? How come this was placed upon him? So they're looking at this guy. Jesus is looking at this guy. Their attention is now fixed upon this blind man, and they have a question, and they ask that question. And we ask that question today too. We ask the question, how come this is? How come we struggle in this relationship? God, how come this person gets all the breaks? God, look at the way they live. They do not live following after you, but Lord, it appears they get all the breaks. How come the ball never bounces our way? God, we tithe, we attend church, we're here all the time, we serve in your ministries, we do this for you, but it feels like the ball never bounces our way. God, this doesn't make sense. If anybody would be blessed, it should be us, but yet it looks like we don't get the blessing. We ask those questions all the time. Why does this person have to suffer? Why did they get this disease? Why did this person pass? Why does this exist in our world today? We ask those questions. We all ask that. The Old Testament, there's a verse in the Old Testament that says the sins of the father will be passed down to the third and the fourth generation. Sometimes we might think, well, our parents' sin is upon us. I don't believe that to be exactly true. We'll look at that in just a moment. But when you read that verse in the Old Testament, the sins of the father passed down to the third and fourth generation, that's really referring to national sin. It's a national sin when the fathers of Israel didn't pass down the things of God to their sons and their daughters. When they didn't pass it down, the sons and the daughters had forgotten the things of God and they drifted from God. They no longer followed God. Why? Because the fathers didn't pass down the works of God to their children. It still applies today. Just look at our nation. Our nation is in this as well. Just look at us today. One, the easiest illustration that could always be pointed to, abortion. Abortion. One generation approves abortion, and look at us today. Abortion is legalized in this country. It's the Supreme Court, who thinks they are above God at times, was voted it to be okay, and now it's law. So abortion is acceptable. Not only abortion, but late-term abortion is acceptable. Not only that, but after birth abortion is permitted. And now today we have Planned Parenthood teamed up with the state of California and the state of Washington, and they are teaching not sex ed to elementary students, but participating in group sex with elementary students. You don't believe me? Look it up. I'm not going to lie to you. One generation says this is okay. And look what we have today. It's done us good, hasn't it? God will not put up with this forever. He will only take so much. But back to verse 2. Back to verse 2. Your sin can impact another person, but I don't believe God punishes the son or the daughter because of the parent's sin. The consequence of your sin may fall on another person, but it's not the punishment. He didn't punish them because of your sin. Scripture doesn't teach a son being punished because of a father's sin. At least I haven't seen it. Matter of fact, we could even look at Jesus right here. He just moves into verse 3. He just moves into the next thing. He doesn't even really address this. They're asking, which parent sinned, the mom or the dad, that this guy is born blind. And Jesus kind of brushes it off. He answers here in verse 3. He says, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now, why did they even Why did they even ask this? Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Why do they even ask this? But he's born this way. So how could, and Jesus is referenced that this man is neither this man's parents nor himself. The man sinned. It's not that, because they're saying the man didn't sin. How could he sin? He was born this way. How could he sin in the womb? Well, the rabbis taught. The rabbis taught that a person could be born, could sin in the womb. They could sin before birth, and they got this teaching from Esau and Jacob. If you remember, when Rebekah was pregnant with Esau and Jacob, she said, "It feels like there are two nations inside of me." And what are they doing? They are at war. And they were. They were at war then, and they are still at war today. And today you know them as Israel and the Arab nations. So they're still at war. So that's where they got that teaching from and that thought process from. So the Jews taught that. They taught many other stuff as well, but Jesus doesn't really give that the time of day for somebody to be able to sin in the womb, and possibly because it's not even scriptural. So here we are, verse 3. Jesus says it's neither this man sinned nor his parents. He didn't do this in the womb, but it was so. Here's what Jesus says, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. In this difficulty of life, there is opportunity for God's glory to shine. So God's glory has opportunity to shine even as this man is born blind. Even in your difficulty of life, there is opportunity for the glory of God to be displayed. God says, whatever your difficulty is, let His glory shine through you in these times. Whatever it is. Jesus says that so God's glory might be displayed, and then He does, verse 6. When He had said this, He spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and applied the clay to His eyes. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. There's a lot to this action that is taking place. But the Hebrews, they taught that spit contained life. I've told you that before, I'm pretty sure. And there's some truth to that. Even how their science and medical knowledge was very, very limited. But they believed that there was life in spit. Now, you go to the doctor today, they can swab your mouth. They can swab your mouth and see what chemicals are in your body. Through the swab of your mouth, they can look into your body and see what's going on there. They can swab your mouth for a DNA, and DNA is where we get life from. That's where the foundation building blocks of life are. So it's amazing that these Hebrews, that this old, long ago, that they understood that there was life in saliva, that there was life in a person's mouth. So you can get your mouth swabbed today, and you can find out your DNA, and it tells the makeup of who you are. It tells about yourself. So now that we know what spit can do, saliva does, that saliva has life, it's interesting to reread this again. So what does Jesus do? He spit on the ground. There's life. That's spit, life. He puts this life, He mixes up this life. Where did this life come from? It came from Jesus. Jesus gets this life. He goes back to the ground. We've seen Him in the ground before. And I'm not just talking about the adulterous woman. I'm talking about something that God did back in Genesis. But we see Him doing something again with life in the ground. Jesus takes His life, He applies it to the darkness of this person's life. Jesus takes His life and applies it to the darkness of your life as well. He applies it to this man so he can have light. Jesus applies his life to your life so that you can have eternal life and light as well. So, if you remember back in the Old Testament, God forms man out of the dust of the ground. He's forming him out of clay is what it was. If you look at Adam's name means ruddy. That means reddish clay. So God made the first man out of clay, formed him out of the dust of the ground, breathed life into him. Now we see Jesus, we see God, we see Jesus, the Son of God, at work again, working in the clay, working in the dust, and Jesus is recreating life. Adam represents man, fallen man, but Jesus comes and restores that which is fallen. That's what he's doing here with this spittle, with this life, with this clay, as he applies it to this blind man who is born into blindness. So Jesus is recreating here. He's recreating life. Jesus has told them, I am. They know what that means. The religious leaders, the people of that day, know what it means when Jesus says, I am from eternity past. I am, and he displays it by recreating life. In this moment, Jesus takes his life and he applies it to the point of darkness in this man. Jesus takes his life, applies it to the point of darkness in your life as well. Now, your darkness, you say, well, I'm not blind. I'm not blind, so it doesn't apply to me. No, your darkness does not have to be blindness physically. Your darkness could be a multitude of sins. You could insert any sin and place it in there, and Jesus applies his life to your sin and removes it from you. If physical need, it could be beyond. You could have a physical need. Jesus takes his life. He meets your physical need. It could be a relationship. You struggle in a relationship. Jesus takes his life. He applies it to that struggling relationship, and he restores it. Jesus applies his life to our darkness, and he recreates, he restores what is broken, what is fallen. So Jesus does that, and he says it's removed. When you allow Jesus to do his work and apply it to the darkness, the dark spot of your life, Jesus removes it. And that's what this guy is going to do. This guy is going to remove. Jesus has applied. Jesus gives instruction. So this guy has an obligation. This guy has a responsibility that is attached to this. Jesus wants to take his life and bring you, wants to deliver you to eternal light. Now here's his response, verse 7. And he said to him, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which translated sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. I don't know about you. How quick do you think this guy came back? Now, this guy hasn't ever seen before. He hasn't caught a glimpse of a sunrise, a sunset. He hasn't seen a flower bloom. He's never seen any of the colors that God, much less light and dark, he hasn't even seen. So this gentleman, this guy, he came back seeing. I'm assuming that this guy is excited. I'm assuming he's overjoyed. We're going to read about him going next week. And we got to keep this story going. This is a great story here, this guy. What happens next? So this guy, he's going to identify who Jesus is next week probably, but he has a responsibility here. There were pools that were closer. Why does he have to go to the pool of Siloam? Why couldn't he just go? There's going to be some watering troughs just outside the door there, just outside the gate. Why couldn't he splash some water from, the water fountain there? There's probably a place for people to drink, for goats to drink, for sheep to drink, for horses to drink. Why can't he just splash? There's other pools along the way. Why does he have to go to this pool that is so far away? It's down a mountain range. He's got to walk down steps. He's got to get down from the temple. He's got to get down not only the temple of Jerusalem, there's another mountain, Mount of Zion, I think it is, where David built his palace. He's got to go to that plateau. He's got to move past that plateau. He's got to go down that mountain. He's got to get down to this other pool. Then he's got to walk down the steps. Do you know how many people were in the city at that time? The city's full of people, full of animals, full of merchants. People are doing business. People are buying things. This dude, he can't see. Why does Jesus send him all the way? Why does Jesus send him all the way to this other pool that's so far away? Couldn't some other place, but this dude obeys. He obeys. He obeys what Jesus says. So he is trying to feel his way. He's in darkness. He's feeling his way around the walls, the steps. He's probably counted the steps. He knows how far it is. He's got this rehearsed, this memorized, maybe in his mind. When he gets there, this guy bends over. He bends over. He places his head, his face into that pool. He splashes that water up on his face, and he begins to open his eyes. Begins to open and crack his eyes open, and he sees a sliver of light that busts into his eyes. It just bursts upon his face. He has felt the light before, but now he sees the light. He sees images. He looks to his left. He looks to his right. He looks in front of him. He sees faces. He sees the faces of all these other people, and maybe he even sees his own face somewhere. He's never seen his own face. This guy now sees how fast, how quick do you think he ran back to Jesus? See, it's a picture. This is a picture of salvation. Whatever your struggle is, whatever you struggle with, like I said, none of you are blind. You don't have the darkness of physically not being able to see, but you have a spot that you need Jesus to apply His life to in your life so that you can have that light placed upon it. Jesus walks into the darkness of our life and He delivers us into eternal light. Jesus does that for that man at the pool. Now this is as far as we can get this week. We'll have to pick this story up next week. There's much, much more packaged in here. But just as Jesus, you see this now. You see that life that Jesus took. He recreates. Man is fallen. We've looked at the spiritual leaders. They were fallen. Now this is a picture of Israel. Israel's in blindness, the nation of Israel. And Jesus applies His life to their darkness. Are you in darkness today? Will you allow Jesus to apply His life to your darkness? Whatever it is, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All of us, all men, all women, everyone who has ever, apart from Jesus, everyone who's ever walked on the face of this earth has sinned. But Jesus made a way. Will you allow His life to be applied to yours so that you can walk in that eternal light of a Savior? Stand with me this morning and bow your head. This is our time of invitation.